Welcome to Measures of Truth, a His Dark Materials podcast. I'm Caitlin.
I'm Alan.
And I'm Anya. And today we're discussing Chapter 18, Fog and Ice, Chapter 19, Captivity, and Chapter 20, Mortal Kombat.
Which, if you have the British edition of the book, it might be called Outrance. I have no idea how to say that, so I don't know what I just spoke.
Does yours go into the techno music? It's like Mortal Kombat.
I was going to say, was that like a copyright thing?
Well,
that would be
I genuinely don't know because I just genuinely don't know. Also, Mortal Kombat, isn't that spelled with a K, the video game?
Oh, yeah.
It is.
Good point.
I think it actually in our doc here says that it's misspelled because it's not with a K.
So this week, in Chapter 18, the chapter opens with Lee and Seraphina having a talk about what's going to happen, and Seraphina mentions to Lee that all of them have been fighting in a war already without knowing it. Lee doesn't take kindly to that and says that he likes to choose whether to fight or not and who he's fighting for. This leads to a conversation about destiny versus choice, and Seraphina mentions the prophecy about Lyra and how she must know nothing about it in order to fulfill it. Lyra is destined to bring about the end of destiny, and that if she fails, it will be the triumph of despair forever, and the universe will become nothing more than interlocking machines, blind and empty of thought, feeling, life. Lee brings up that Lyra came all this way simply to rescue Roger, her friend. Seraphina suggests that the Fates made sure to capture Roger so that Lyra would come all this way as they need her to bring something to her father. They talk a bit more, then Lee goes to sleep. Lyra then wakes up for her turn to chat with Seraphina. They talk about how Lord Azrael wants to travel to this other world, the nature of witches, and Seraphina's relationship with Farder Coram. Then they talk about who Iorek really is, and that had he not been exiled from Svalbard, he would have been king of the bears. They talk about how Iorek Ragnarsson, the current king of the bears, has been changing the bear kingdom, making things more human-like. Lyra also asks Seraphina if she knows what dust is. Seraphina has heard of it and has seen humans do strange things in their pursuit of it, but it is not in the nature of witches to fret and tear things apart to find out what they are. Lyra goes back to sleep and wakes up to cliff ghasts attacking the balloon. As they are heading lower to the ground, Lyra is knocked out of the basket. She finds herself alone in the snow of Svalbard and is quickly found by a bear and told she is a prisoner.
In Chapter 19, Lyra is taken to a great stone building and put in the dungeon. There, she asks the alethiometer where Iorek is, and it tells her that the balloon got dragged away, but Iorek is running towards her and Roger is with him. Then a man speaks, and Lyra finds that she was not alone in the cell, like she previously thought she was. The man, it turns out, is a scholar from the University of Gloucester. Lyra quickly knows exactly what to say to get any information she wants out of this man, as tricking scholars is something she has been doing her whole life. She learns that the bears won't let Iorek get close as he has been exiled. They'll just kill him from afar. She also learns that Iorek has been bewitched by Mrs. Coulter and basically wants to be human. She remembers hearing a scholar say back in their tiring room that what Iorek Ragnarsson wanted more than anything was a demon. Eventually, a bear comes to bring them food, and she demands to be brought to the king. The bears listen and bring her to Iorek Ragnarsson. Lyra convinces Iorek that she has become Iorek's demon through experiments done at Bolvangar, but she wants to be his demon, and the only way to accomplish this is for Iorek to defeat Iorek in single combat. She gets information from the alethiometer to convince Iorek, and he agrees to allow Iorek in so they can fight.
In Chapter 20, Iorek and Iorek fight. Iorek wins in a surprisingly gory description. where he removes Yofer's lower jaw and is now the king of the bears. Afterwards, Lyra learns from the alethiometer how Mrs. Coulter was slowly gaining control over the bears in Svalbard so she could set up another station there and do experiments that were prevented by human law. Things even worse than what was happening at Bolvangar. Lyra also sees that Mrs. Coulter's on her way and that they need to get to Lord Asriel before she arrives.
Yeah, shortest summary yet, because most of that chapter is just bears hitting bears. Not that it's bad, it's just boring to summarize. So what was everybody's favorite part? Alan, you want to go first?
I am a big sucker for exposition in fantasy. It's like the sex scene in a romance novel for me. It's like, like that is why I'm here in a fantasy book, is to have someone just dump a bunch of lore and world building. And so that conversation between Serafina and Lee, and then Serafina and Lyra, is like fantastic. I really, really love like all the stuff that we get there and how they're kind of philosophizing about the metaphysics of their world, and how Lee is just like really grumpy about it all. He's like, I'm just making conversation here, but maybe I'm going to get killed, and I kind of care about that, you know?
And also, maybe somebody should pay me more.
Right.
I love that too, how he kept on being like, just to pass the time, I'm just going to ask you all these very pointed questions. Like, does he really think that he's pulling the wool over on her eyes on that? Or is he just like trying to be weirdly polite about it? I don't know.
I think, he's a good Southern boy, so he's trying to be weirdly polite, but knows that everybody knows what he means.
Yeah, I definitely...
So Han Solo, yeah.
Up until this point, all we'd had was the word Texas, but I think based on, like, the more we hear of Lee Scoresby's accent and a little bit about his world where he comes from, the more it seems like the U.S. South definitely exists, even if, like, we hear no other mention of it, and it seems like the United States as a big power doesn't quite exist. It's like just the plantation cattle state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because they didn't just send people to Plymouth Rock, right? There was people in the Carolinas and Virginia and all of that stuff that had nothing to do with the Puritans. So, I mean, and then plenty of other Europeans went over there too, Spanish, French, all that stuff. So there definitely would be European types on the American continent.
I see.
But who knows what it would be.
It's just that the Puritans themselves didn't settle it as like a religious escape.
Yeah. So America would just be fundamentally different, or wouldn't exist. Like maybe it's just a bunch of little countries or something. Who knows?
I'm really tempted to ask some questions about that, but this isn't Teach Caitlin American History podcast.
We can do that one next.
It's depressing. That's what I would say.
Well, I mean, so is Canadian history. Come in, kill the people, take over.
Oh, you have the same history.
Yeah, we do pretty much. So my favorite bit is Lyra's whole conversation with the scholar from Gloucester in the cell, because he's gone a little off, presumably because he's been alone in that cell so long. And Lyra just plays him like a fiddle and gets all the information she needs and it's just so good. And I especially love when the bit where he says, my demon's tongue can taste probability, And she says, yeah, mine too. When do they feed us, Professor?
Yeah.
And she's just like, yeah, absolutely. Wait, I need actual information here. Please tell me these things.
I love how Pullman plays up that, like, I mean, we've seen that Lyra's a very skilled manipulator and liar in general, but that, like, she specifically knows how to manipulate scholars best of all.
Yeah.
And,
it's
like,
so good.
Yeah.
She's like, I bet, he probably copied your thesis and all of this. And he's like, yes, that's right. That's what happened. And I know it better than they do. And she's like, totally. Yeah. It's so good. You should be my teacher. I bet you would be a great teacher. Yes, I would.
Yeah, it's so good.
And he's batshit crazy.
It seems like Pullman has definitely spent a lot of time around academics, even if he was not an academic himself.
Yep. And knows exactly what makes them angry and things to say to calm them down.
It's like, yes, my teaching is brilliant.
Similarly, I love when she's talking to Yofer and just how she knows how to lie to him to get what she wants. It's sort of the same thing, and I love that too. There are other reasons why I love that, but no spoilers, so I can't go into it. But I guess I'll say that it's mirrored in a scene in a later book, and I think really showcases the journey that Lyra decides. Well, we could say Lyra chooses to take herself, and the journey, like the personal journey, somebody else chooses to take, and how. Anyways, I can't really go into it, but I like it.
Well, I basically picked the same two favorite things that you did and assumed that you would probably pick one of them and I would take the other, and I was not wrong. So I have as my favorite part Lyra talking to Iorek and the whole deception of pretending to be Iorek's demon. And I had like vaguely remembered this, like, so when we were reading the earlier chapters, it had jogged my memory in the opening couple of chapters when they were talking about how the King of the Bears wanted a demon most of all. And I was like, oh yeah. So I remembered that there was some sort of deception in that way. But I'd forgotten that Lyra actually pretended to be the demon rather than just promising to be able to get him one.
Right.
And it's just, I love that it's so clear that, like, as much as Iorek really wants to be a human and wants to have a demon, he like doesn't actually understand how any of that works.
You mean Iorek?
Or sorry, Iorek, yeah.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
And yeah, she's just like, she's so brilliant thinking on her feet. And so, yeah, she just pulls it off beautifully.
It is very well done. And it shows how she's so good at peppering in things that seem really, really plausible. Like they were doing experiments at Bolvanger.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like that could have happened.
Yeah. And the whole thing about how witches' demons can travel farther than human demons. You know, she's like clearly pulling from everything that she's experienced in a really creative way.
It's also cool that like he is an animal shape, and so she would be like a human shape. Like it just makes an intuitive kind of sense that you can just buy it. And he's already got that dummy of Mrs. Coulter that he's kind of like treating like a demon kind of. So he's set up for this kind of deception.
I just genuinely love how smart Lyra is.
Yeah.
Did we have any problematic things?
No.
I have one that might, but I don't know enough about the culture to say for sure. I have it listed down under our religion section, but when Seraphina mentions the name of the witch goddess of the dead, Yambe Aka, that is an actual goddess from a religion, from the Sami religion. Sami
I don't
religion.
know about this. Cool. What is it?
The Sami are the indigenous people in Scandinavia.
Yeah, so they're from like the northern parts of Norway and Finland and Sweden, and I think a small part of Russia. And I am not sure how potentially, like, maybe Pullman is just saying that in this world, the Sami people are the witches, but I don't know if the actual Sami people would appreciate their religion just being given to these witches. I don't know. That might be problematic.
Yeah, that's a good point. I did not do enough research to know that. Although,
no, me neither.
I did know Renee Zellweger is probably one of the more famous like celebrities with Sami heritage.
Oh, interesting.
I don't know that people group, but I know like you said like Finnish people and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I know like in European linguistics, there's all these different families, but then there's like groups, like bigger groups, that kind of tell you like migration patterns from like ancient times. And like we all speak English, which is like an Indo-European language. And so like all of the evidence points to Indo-Europeans invaded Europe, kind of like from the Black Sea. And the people who were there were like those people, the Finnish people and Basque people and Icelandic people. And like their language is like radically different from all of the other European languages. There's just like a few holdout groups, out there speaking these very different languages and very different cultural heritage. And so that's interesting that he would make them the witch people. It kind of makes sense to me, like culturally, that they would have a very distinct non-Christian, kind of culture in the middle of the magisterium. That's cool.
I think Hungarian too is a non-Indo-European language.
Yeah. You're right.
I didn't do too much reading, but I did happen to read that the Sami language has like roots in common with the Inuit language. So that's interesting that they're, because I considering how far apart they are, or at least in my brain, because I forget that the world is round. You think of a map and you think that those two areas aren't really near each other, but they are if you go, north instead of west or east. So that's interesting. And also just goes to show that the world was once all closer together and more connected physically.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and that during the Ice Age, things were like more or less connected.
That's what I meant, yeah. But that's the only potentially problematic bit that stood out to me.
There's like some hyperviolence in the fight. It didn't bother me too much, but like, I don't know.
I guess Iorek does participate in cannibalism, but that doesn't bother me.
I mean, it didn't bother me, but it did seem like a little bit more graphic than I was expecting, given the like age group that I think this book is usually targeted at, which is, kind of like pretty YA young people.
Well, you clearly have not played Mortal Kombat then, because like he finished him. I mean, that's what you do.
His finishing move was slicing him open and eating his heart.
Yeah. Knocked his jaw off.
Yummy.
It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I think the finishing move was just like biting his throat out, but the heart eating was just a celebration.
That's fair, I guess. Okay, so here's actually something that I'm strangely curious about. Just after that, when Roger shows up, Lyra and Roger eat some of the seal, and she eats the blubber and says it tastes like cream and hazelnuts or something. And I'm like, is that an accurate description of seal blubber? Because that's weird and interesting.
I don't know. I took it to mean that she was very hungry.
I guess there's that.
I mean, I'll say that like at one point in my life, I was like homeless and I ate garbage. And it was really good because I was just happy to eat something. So like, but I don't know that that's what he's doing there. But I do remember when I read it for the show, I was like, oh yeah, when you're very hungry, disgusting things are awesome.
I'm not even saying that seal blubber is necessarily disgusting. I'm just curious about
raw
what it's actually like.
I've never eaten raw seal blubber, but I have had like bone marrow, and that was kind of what I was imagining it of, because it has like a texture and a taste that's kind of similar to just like pure fat, and like could see it being described as hazelnutty. It's like kind of just like, I don't know, very like rich and fatty.
Yes.
Well, if anybody out there listening has had seal blubber, please let us know. I'm very curious about what it's actually like. Not curious enough to seek it out, especially since seals are cute. So I just don't think I eat lamb, so that doesn't matter. Carry on.
Oh yeah, cute things usually taste better. I'm sure it tastes good.
Well, I don't enjoy eating things raw, so not even fish. Yeah. So I don't know how I would. I don't think I could do it.
I mean, in that situation, starving, I definitely would.
Yes. That's fair. I just don't personally expect to be in that situation. Lost in Svalbard, and the only option being a freshly killed seal by my polar bear friend.
It could happen.
Svalbard is a real place. It's an archipelago that's in the north, super, super north.
Well, if you are going to eat raw meat, it should probably be fresh. At least there was that. That was kind of like my thought as I was reading it.
That's true.
Yeah.
It was still like hot from the seal's body heat.
Mm-hmm.
Just worms. Watch out for that.
Anyways, we can stop talking about cannibalism and eating raw meat if we want to, and move on to science. Was there any science?
I don't think so.
I didn't really notice anything in this chapter.
And I think we decided we would wait until the next section to follow up about string theory and multiverse stuff.
Right, that makes sense.
Because all you get is that academic who's locked up in terms of like sciencey people.
I mean, I guess
he's not reliable.
We could talk about the science of balloons, but I didn't research it, so we can't.
They're magic.
Well, I mean, we are running out of helium. The strategic helium reserve is getting depleted because people keep putting them in fucking birthday balloons, even though helium is a non-renewable element and there's a limited amount, and we're just like getting rid of it, and it's really important for scientific and industrial processes, and it makes me mad. Sorry, because they use hydrogen in the balloons in this universe, but that was my helium rant for today. There we go. That's the science section.
I wonder if the Hindenburg just didn't happen in this world. Like there just was never a huge accident that people were like, oh, can't do that anymore. Because that's kind of why Zeppelin stopped.
Or they were just like, God willed it. So sometimes accidents happen.
Too bad. Those people deserved what happened to them.
Or either like nobody ever invented the airplane, you know? Either they didn't, or the church decided that was too much. I don't know.
Now that you say that, there haven't been airplanes. Because why would they?
Yeah.
They don't even talk about the possibility of it. He's like, well, if the wind's blowing the right way, but otherwise we're screwed. And nobody says like, well, we'll take an airplane. It's not a thing. Huh. Interesting.
So I guess we've got no choice but to move on to religion.
No choice. The boring part that everybody skips through.
Okay, I would like to say that I don't generally say much during these bits because I actually find what you're saying kind of interesting and I'm listening.
Well, thanks.
It's not because I've checked out.
I think we're kind of setting the foundation for being able to have a more informed and nuanced conversation once the TV show comes out. Like having this foundation in the philosophy and theology is going to be really helpful.
That, and also I like going over all this now because a lot of the religion in this first book is kind of in the background.
Yeah.
And then
I agree.
In book 2 and book 3, that stops. It's very much in the foreground. Like very, very much. And so it's nice to talk about all the symbolism and the stuff in the background now so that later when it's nope, that's a big spoiler.
Well, it's just more explicit.
Yeah,
really.
More explicit. Then we can fall back on all this discussion that we've had.
Yeah, because hopefully when people were reading like the conversation between Serafina and Lee, you would be thinking about like she's saying, you know, everything is already fated and we have to fight against this thing that's going to turn us all into like machines kind of. And you hopefully you're thinking about like the stuff that we've been talking about with John Calvin and the idea of predestination and like how everybody's locked into that, or you're locked into your teleological role, or, you know, like the role you're supposed to fulfill in the world. And so, because really when I was like, I reread the book before we started the project and I was kind of like, what should I talk about with religion? Because like you said, it's a little bit thin. It's a little bit in the background. And I also have like a strong kind of, why do I want to say psychological? It's not psychological, philosophical like reaction to this book. I have a strong philosophical reaction where I'm like, I don't, this is the part that makes me a little bit upset with the bears here. I don't like how this goes, and I don't like the message that we get about like the bear citizenry and stuff. So like a lot of the things that I've been talking about this whole time have really been setting up me complaining for this one, honestly.
Okay, well, let's hear it. What don't you like about these bears?
Well, I think the bears are fine. Like, I really like the fight, actually. And this is such a J.R.R. Tolkien thing, right? Like, oh, secretly one of your party members is the king, right?
Right, yes.
You never knew that. I just don't like what it means for the, like, people who are citizens that we don't get to see, or I guess bears who are citizens, not people. But they're people, right? These bears are people.
Yes, these bears are people.
But I want to start off with that talk between Serafina and Lee about determinism or your fate and all of that kind of stuff. Because there is, last time we were talking about, all kinds of like, do you have any control over this? Like because of science and quantum theory and all of that. Like, so there's a philosophy called physicalism, and basically the idea of physicalism is that if you don't believe in souls, or like Descartes said, I think, therefore I am, therefore my mind is not my body, therefore there is mind stuff and body stuff. If you don't believe that, if you just think he's wrong about that, physicalism is for you. Like there's no gods, there's no supernatural stuff. Only matter exists. But then if you believe that everything that happens is caused by something else, if you believe in like cause and effect, and there's only matter, then that means that there's like a chain of cause and effect that goes all the way back to whatever the first cause was. And everything that follows is like predetermined by the properties of matter. It's like dominoes falling down or something.
Right.
And there's not really any free will or choice in that kind of like mechanistic physical system. It kind of sounds like what Seraphina's talking about, that everything's going to turn into like a giant machine. And that would include like your brain is made out of atoms and the same stuff that, like, you know, like everything's made out of the same stuff. And so even the thoughts in your head, presumably under physicalism, would not be like, you might feel like you're making choices, but that doesn't mean you are making choices. They're inevitable because of the way that matter works. It's just like a consequence of whatever started the universe in the Big Bang. It's really depressing and troubling if you care about free will.
And so Seraphine is basically saying that if Lyra doesn't do the thing that she's going to do, their world is going to like downgrade into a world ruled by physicalism.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like to me, that there's like some kind of hard determinism that is just like gonna take over somehow. I mean, it just makes the stakes super high in a way that you're like, whoa, what? Like, because it's not just their world. She says like every world will be like an interlocking machine that just like does what it does. And a lot of philosophers and scientists believe that that is the nature of our world. And there's all kinds of science to back it up. Like neuroscience has been finding that like when you make choices, they're not necessarily under your control. You think you've made the choice, but actually your brain already like locked things into place before you ever thought you made the choice.
Then why is it so hard to choose what to make for dinner? Like if my brain already knows, can it just send that to me? Can I just not have to think about it?
I guess it depends on if Lyra succeeds or not.
And we haven't gotten there, so we haven't observed it. So it's both, and it's not. Anyways, carry on.
You're going to have, that's right. Every dinner possibility is simultaneously happening. Well, yeah. So on the subject of free will, those dinner possibilities, you really have to have a choice in order to have free will, right? Like if there's only one thing to eat, you can't really make a choice. And so that's like a fundamental idea, both in religion and in philosophy, of how free will operates. And the same thing for morality. If you can only do evil things, like, then that has no moral value. Are you evil if you don't have a choice about being evil? Or the same thing about being good, right? Can you be said to be good if all of your choices are only good choices? Whatever that, might mean in terms of your morality. So like the condition of free will is choice. And it's also a condition of morality. And we see this, throughout this whole thing with Lyra, where she's like choosing to tell lies to people. But here in the second and third parts of the book, when she's doing that, there's good moral reasons for her to do it. So even though we would consider lying maybe morally wrong in a lot of different moral systems, it's actually like the right moral choice instead of her telling the truth and getting captured and stopped. And her getting captured and stopped would be really bad for the entire universe, apparently.
Right.
So last time we talked about original sin, and this plays into the idea of free will quite a bit, because like I just said, you can't really make good choices or bad choices if you only have one choice. And original sin is the idea that like when Adam and Eve sinned by eating from the tree of knowledge, that basically their sinful nature got encoded into them as people and then has been passed down throughout human history ever since then. So all of us carry the tendency to sin and be immoral because of their original choice. Now, this is not something that the other Abrahamic religions believe. Islam and Judaism do not believe in the idea of original sin. We don't carry guilt from birth as human beings based on what Adam and Eve did. We just don't have access to paradise anymore because of what they did. But our nature is not different. And the reason that they don't believe that is because if you think about it, it means that you don't have any choice about whether or not you're good. Your only choices are to be bad, because even if you try to do the right thing, you're still an immoral creature and everything that you do is bad and you're going to go to hell. It doesn't matter what you choose. under original sin. There's only one choice that matters, and that's if you convert to Christianity. Because through the conversion, then you are born again, literally, in a spiritual sense. And then after that, you have the ability to choose to do the right thing or the wrong thing, because your nature has changed from that original sin nature to a born again nature. This is actually like a theological doctrine called acquired freedom. So you're not free until you make that choice. You're not able to actually make choices until you convert to Christianity.
And acquired freedom is in Catholic doctrine too, because I guess I'm used to thinking about the phrase born again as a like Protestant evangelical thing.
So born again actually comes from Jesus saying it. It's like directly out of the Gospels. And it's something that, evangelicals definitely, that is like their saying for conversion. Acquired freedom is the more technical theological term that comes out of Catholicism, because they recognize, like, Catholicism were the ones who, Thomas Aquinas came up with the idea of original sin. And he's the one, and he's Catholic, of course.
I'm sorry. I thought God came up with.
Well, you know what I mean.
Sorry.
Like, Thomas Aquinas figured it out, and wrote it down for us. But yeah, definitely God.
Definitely God. Yep.
And so, like, he had to work through he immediately realized this thing that I'm describing. Like, this isn't me, clearly. Like, I didn't figure all this shit out, but I've studied it. So, like, he figured out, okay, well, if there's this thing of original sin and inherited, sinfulness, then that means we don't have any choices, and that makes God a tyrant. Well, that's a problem. I got to go back and figure out why that's not true. And the reason is because Jesus died for us. And if you, follow all of the Christian sacraments, then you can get acquired freedom and you get your choice back. And then God's not a tyrant. And so that is the most important choice that you can make in Christianity, not only for the state of your immortal soul, but because it's the only way to have any choice in your life at all. So
including what you're making for
crazy.
dinner?
Yeah. Like, no matter what your choice would be, it would be immoral. It wouldn't matter how vegan you are. You're a bad person for whatever you choose.
I'm going to eat my chicken stew with a different frame of thought tonight. My sinful chicken stew. Sorry.
So the reason, I went from there, like when I was reading this, I was thinking about all this free will stuff and the determinism that Serafina and Lee are talking about. But that rolls right into, at least for me, what's going on with Iorek here and his entire situation and the way that he has been exiled from his community for murder, which is something that is like a taboo for bears. They don't murder each other in the circumstance that he was involved with. And that's a little bit like Adam and Eve getting exiled from paradise, which was like the perfect place for human beings. And like Adam and Eve getting exiled from paradise is like the whole point of Milton's Paradise Lost. I mean, it's right there in the title. And that's like the inspiration partially for this universe and this book. So like it's all tied together in my mind, at least.
I was going to say we're definitely going to be revisiting original sin.
Yeah.
Kind of a lot.
Yeah. And the idea of like Adam and Eve, which of course we haven't mentioned in a long time, the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, but there's a lot of Adam and Eve business in those books where they're constantly calling those kids like daughter of Eve and son of Adam. And that whole idea of like their innocence, which is a state of sinlessness for children, and the idea that once you hit puberty, you are no longer innocent, and all of that stuff, and that original sin like sets in on you, like all of that stuff I feel like is related to these books too. Adam and Eve are important, is what I'm trying to say. Turns out.
I can't believe in this bit in the book when Serafina and Lee are talking that she was like, we've all been fighting in a war, and Lee pretty much just whistles past that. I'd have been like, wait, what war? Whose side am I on? Please explain what you're talking about.
I mean, he did ask a little bit.
He did, but they don't really go into it. And I'm like, what? But
and she's like, we're on Lyra's side. And I will be like, excuse me? Like, I'm a grown man. That is a tiny child. What are we talking about?
Yeah. So I guess what I'm saying is that is to be continued, the war that we're all fighting in. But also, since we're talking about original sin, I think it's easy to figure out what war we're all fighting in.
Yeah. The war, right?
Yeah.
The war. And by the way, like Jewish, in the Jewish religion, as far as Adam and Eve go, they really don't read that story in the same dire way that Christianity does. There's like a lot of it is seen as being about growing up and realizing like how complex morality and responsibility and knowledge and agency, how all of that is, and how you lose your innocence and like grow up.
So basically more like a metaphor?
Yeah. Yeah, Jewish theology is like so beautiful to me because they simultaneously take everything literally and then everything metaphorically at the same time and give it the same weight and value.
But also how you just described it, you could literally describe these books that way.
Right. Yeah. And I don't think that's an accident. I think that Pullman is, using these themes, and he's very much understands the story that he's retelling here. And Adam and Eve are like fundamental to what's going on, even if like you said, in this book, it's a little bit more subtle. Mm-hmm. But I do see it, like I said, with the Panzer Bjorn and Iorek's exile, because what I see there as the fundamental sin for Iorek is not just the murder, but that the murder is unbearish, like it's not the way that bears behave.
Right.
And so that's the real reason he's getting kicked out of the community, because if he's not being like teleologically a bear, then he can't be here.
I feel like if our podcast had like a bingo card, teleology would be that free space in the middle.
Yeah.
It's just so important. I think that people like understand that this idea is like this really insidious idea that you don't belong here because you're not performing your role adequately. And like, this is something that is so deeply encoded in our society and in our modern culture that this is what makes me crazy in this story, is this idea of teleology being applied to people, I guess, or bears in this case, but who are people? Because like, this is how it goes for like our group identity, right? Like you say like, I'm a millennial, but if you didn't go through the job crash and you don't have like student debt and you don't like avocado toast, are you really a millennial?
Hey now. Excuse you. I am a millennial and avocados are fucking disgusting. Carry on.
I don't like avocado toast either, but
I can't believe I'm the only one here standing up for avocados.
But you can kind of see what I mean, that like you talked about this in the first episode, Anya, where you were saying like, if you're an academic, you have to kind of not care about your appearance on a certain level because it like sends this signal that like I belong because I care more about whatever my specialty is than I do looking good or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. Basically that you like are not devoting enough time to your work if you have time to care about your appearance.
Yeah. And that's like a teleological principle that you're like, you have all the correct qualities to be a member of the group. And the more that you exhibit those qualities, the more accepted you are into the group. It's an insidious idea that like group membership matters more than your individual personality. But the really big problem that I see in our society is like, all of the Western religions have seen like big church fall off as like people are leaving churches and getting out and not going back into any kind of religion whatsoever. But when they leave, they're taking like the structure that we've been talking about of like original sin and your teleological place, all of that structure with them. And they're just trading things out from that structure for new things that are like modern secular values without really thinking about how that will affect things. It's kind of like if you went from like romance novels to science fiction novels, and you were like, oh, this is totally different stuff. But actually, it's still a 3-act structure. You're still getting like a story catharsis at the end. On a certain level, it is kind of the same thing. It's just a completely different flavor of the same thing. And so the problem that I see here with the bears, I think can be really well illustrated in a story that's like a very nicely characterizes like the postmodern problem and the way that we've applied our modern morality to a kind of church structure. It's this playwright named Václav Havel wrote an essay called The Power of the Powerless in the 1970s. And he was living in Eastern Europe under the control of the USSR. And basically, like, he tells a story in one part of the essay, and then he gives his commentary on what he thinks the story means. So I'll quickly summarize this story because I think it's really relevant, and it's extremely relevant to like modern times. And I think it plugs into the story of the bears and everything that bothers me about this. But basically, there's these people called the green grocers. This is like the grocery store for everyone that are like owned by the state. So like if you're going to go to the grocery store, like everything's owned by the state under the USSR, to be clear. And every day when the grocer opens, he hangs a sign in the window that says, "Workers of the world unite." And like the grocer does not believe that the workers of the world are going to unite. And like the people who shop in his grocery store don't believe that the workers of the world are going to unite. And the government doesn't believe that the workers of the world are going to unite. And the government knows that the people know that the workers are not going to unite. And the people know that the government knows. Like everybody knows that this sign is a lie and nobody says anything about it. And he asks the grocer, like, why do you hang the sign when it's a lie? Why are you living this lie? And the grocer basically says, like, well, if I don't hang the sign up, then somebody will call the secret police and they'll inform on me. And then my kids won't be able to go to college. I might go to jail. Bad thing, they'll take my house. And all of this bad stuff will happen to me. And he's like, yeah, I understand that. He says, I don't have a choice. The government forces me to hang this sign. I'll lose my whole life if I don't do it. I have no power to fight back against the government on this. It's the only source of resources in my life. And he points out in the essay part, after telling this story, that if all of the green grocers pulled down their signs on the same day and just threw them in the trash forever, that would be a revolution in terms of like how the government would see things. This would be like a major act of rebellion. And so they do have power. Those signs still had power. The government still needed people to see them. And the government still needed people to believe that it's not possible to live without them, even though the entire justification for their government system was a lie and everybody knew it. And the idea there is that the grocer is complicit in the system, but he's also a victim of the system, and that he wasn't really as powerless as he thought he was. And that this is like the postmodern kind of moral condition, that all of us, are existing in like a capitalist system that exploits certain people. So we're all complicit in that system, even though we're not really powerful enough to change it necessarily. But if we all worked together simultaneously, we really could change it in significant ways. But that's very difficult to get that kind of solidarity together. And he kind of like draws out this whole moral scheme where there's this idea of privilege, which I think everybody is pretty familiar with, the idea of privilege these days, and that there are perpetrators and victims, basically. And the amount of power that you have, the more power you have makes you more of a perpetrator in the system, and the less power you have makes you more of a victim in the system. but everybody in the system is complicit with it simultaneously. And what you get here, like to go back to this idea of choice and moral possibility, is complicity operates the same way that original sin does. Like if we're all complicit in the system, it's just like original sin and how you really didn't have a choice to be moral. You really don't have a choice in a capitalist system to like make the moral choice, because no matter what you buy, you're still like participating in the system. Even if you try to buy the most moral thing that you can buy, you're still like helping the system out. You're helping the system to exist at all on some level. You're still tacitly approving of it on a certain level.
So my stew really is sinful.
Right.
Well, that's like the saying, there's no ethical consumption under capitalism. Like you're...
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. That's the moral world that he kind of draws out. But I think that this moral world's structure comes from a movement away in the West from Christianity, but a movement when we moved away, we didn't have anything to move to, like structurally speaking. And so we took this structure with us of Christianity, and we took all of the irrational religious systems out of it, and we replaced it with like complicity, privilege, perpetrators, victims, instead of like sin and redemption. And so like moral action in the postmodern left is to take your privilege and redistribute it to marginalized people. And this is like the only way. You're like getting rid of your complicity by doing that. And it's like the only action that you can do to try and redeem yourself is to raise up marginalized groups. Now, I'm not saying that this is immoral to do or like the wrong thing to do. I think that we moved away from an immoral system and we did our best to make it moral. The problem that I have with this structure, I'll get to in a minute, but I'm just trying to illustrate how the structure is roughly equivalent. And like even on the right, the idea of good moral action is to go back to like a more rule-based moral structure that applies to everyone equally and just kind of ignore privilege, just pretend like it doesn't exist, to try and as a means of trying to get rid of this postmodern problem, because it's all very shades of gray once everybody's complicit in it. And I feel like Mrs. Coulter is like the best example of this in the story, and why she like comes off as especially evil to us, because she is happy to be complicit and uses all of that power on the most vulnerable people. She kind of punches down, right? She's never punching up. And she exploits, like poor people and children. And the contrast to that would be like Lyra, who is like a postmodern hero because she's not very complicit at all. She doesn't have very much power in this system, but she does have a little bit. When she starts out, she has all those thoughts about female scholars and how the non-Jordan children are like not as good as her.
Right.
So like, I'm not trying to say that like Pullman is directly thinking about this particular idea of postmodern structure, but I think that all of us just kind of understand that this is how morality works in our culture now, that if you have power, then you're suspect. Like we look at you and everything that you do as what evil shit are you going to get up to next? We don't expect you to do the right thing. And it's actually maybe not very possible for you to do the right thing if you're like a billionaire, and be like, it doesn't matter. Like if you try to build a submarine to help trapped Boy Scouts on the other side of the world, you can never be a good person because you're an asshole billionaire.
There's something I haven't thought about in a while.
Right? A dated reference. And so, you see Lyra going through this story, trying to join groups that she's not authentically a part of over and over, where she wants to go north with Lord Asriel. She wants to be like Mrs. Coulter and be in her circle. Then she thinks that, oh, I'm definitely Egyptian. And after a week, I'm definitely a sailor. And like, it never works because she's not really a part of those groups. And authenticity is really the interchange, I think, with this idea of being born again. that when you are authentically a part of the group that you're in, like, then it's okay to be like in the group. Then you have choices within the context of that group. But if you're not authentically part of that group, everything that you do is morally suspect when you're trying to be in the group. Like Lyra cannot be Egyptian because she's not Egyptian. Everything that she does when she's trying to be Egyptian is like wrong because that's not who she is. And that's the whole thing with these bears, right? Like that's the bear is trying to be a human and he's not a human. And so that's not okay. And the reason that Iorek becoming the king is good is because he changes their culture back to being bearish. And that's like a heroic act in a postmodern sense. But to me, it's like kind of arbitrary. Why is it better to have one king or the other? What about what these bears want? Like, why is it, all these bears were like, build a human palace. Okay, boss, we'll build a human palace. And now the guy who told you to do that got his face knocked off. And it's like, tear down the human palace. Okay, boss, we'll tear down the human palace. And it's like they don't have a choice but to do what the king says because they have to be in the group. They have to the group membership is the most important thing here. That to authentically be in the group is the only way to have any kind of moral choice. And so you're like, there's no way to get out of that complicit system. And you have to be obedient to it. You have to turn yourself from a person into a thing that serves whatever the group interest is rather than like whatever your personal interest would be. And so I don't know, this is like postmodernism to me. There's all these barriers to being your authentic self. And instead because you're like dragged down by this history and by all of the bad things and the exploitation that has happened, and you have no choice but to be in the group, or otherwise you're going to get kicked out of your group the way that Adam and Eve got kicked out of Eden. And so we get stuck in these bubbles. And the really bad thing about these bubbles is the stuff that I was talking about last time with like Blick, where you have these irrational beliefs that will cut you off from information outside of the group. I mean, that's the real reason that the structure exists, especially in evangelical culture. It's to cut you off. You watch Christian movies and listen to Christian music and read Christian books, and all of that is there to inhibit your ability to leave the group, but also to inhibit the ability of the group to reform itself and to change and evolve to meet whatever the modern needs of the people are, the way that a religion should be meeting the needs of its members. Instead, it is working very hard to remain static and to remain disconnected from everyone else. And it's exploiting the people in the group in order to do that, which is extremely poisonous for all of the members. And the problem here is that we've recapitulated that structure throughout our entire secular society. And we have all of these bubbled up groups that it's much more moral now. Like we're including many more people. Like we care about, LGBTQ people and people of color, and all of that is very good. But at the same time, we're all extremely cut off from each other, and we're stuck in structures that are designed to inhibit our ability to reform them and evolve and synthesize in ways that would be more revolutionary and allow us to change the larger structures that are messing our society up. So I see it as a really big problem. And this whole part kind of reinforces the idea of it in a way that makes me grumpy. So
I just about the bear thing.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't bother me at all. Now that you say that it is just like they're exchanging one man in power for another man in power, and they just do whatever they're told. But it didn't bother me at all because of two things. One, when Lyra's there, she does specifically say that she very clearly got the image that nobody really knew what was going on under Iorek Bear-Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Rules changed, they didn't know what to say or what to do, and they just sort of hoped. And it made it sound very much like if they did the wrong thing, punishment was extreme. So
yeah. They're definitely being coerced.
Yeah. And then there was...
I agree.
So the implication then being that when Iorek becomes the king, the other bears will actually be authentically themselves. That it's not really just exchanging one ruler for another. Like the society will be fundamentally different in some way.
Yeah. And the other thing being, like, it's kind of set up like Mrs. Coulter came in and, for lack of a better term, seduced Iorek into her way of thinking.
Oh, yeah.
Very
definitely.
Similarly to how Satan entered the Garden of Eden.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
For sure.
And fucked it all up. And then...
No, that's really good, yeah.
You could make a reference about how Lyra comes in and saves everyone. And I don't think I really want to make a Lyra's Jesus connection here, but you could.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it would be kind of like between her and Iorek, really.
Yeah, I guess
he
in a
does,
way,
like, the heavy lifting.
Iorek was, when he was exiled, like they say he's not a bear anymore, and which is why they originally wouldn't even give him the option of coming close. They would just kill him from afar with fire.
Mm-hmm.
But through everything that happens, he is sort of reborn as a bear and the king of the bears.
Yeah.
So I guess it is a little bit more that Iorek is Bear-Jesus.
Right. Yeah. And you'll notice he's born again through his authenticity, through his, like, he refuses to try and be human. Like, the way that he fights the duel, the way that bears fight the duel, and then he immediately returns their culture back to its roots. And so his authenticity is what allows him to be reborn. I don't think that Pullman's doing this on purpose. I think these are unconscious, like, we've internalized these ideas and these structures, like, so deeply that Pullman is just recapitulating this. Like, I totally agree that Mrs. Coulter is a Satan-like figure in their culture and is, like, invaded their bubble and is corrupting it. And
I can see Philip doing that on purpose. I don't think he was going for Bear-Jesus, but yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it's just, like, teleology is great for, like, figuring out if you have a good cell phone or a good bowl of chicken soup, but it's not good when you apply it to people, because then you are treating people like things. And that's exactly what Serafina was talking about, where the whole world is going to become this giant machine. Like, we are not machines, we are people. We need to think of ourselves as people and treat each other like people and not pretend as if we can be the very best, most authentic, whatever category, group, or job, or, whatever. It's good to, like, measure yourself, but not, you're never going to be that archetype because you're a person. And so it's a insidious, bad idea, teleology. And I think that the story recapitulates it a little bit unconsciously, but I think actually in the long run, especially, Pullman is really good about the bad effects of teleology. But I just wanted to, like, I've been harping on it so much because I want people to understand what it is and to be able to see it out there in the world and in the story, and maybe, like, think a little bit harder about it and reject it, hopefully.
But it's become our catchphrase now, so we have to love it. Well, our podcast is teleologically meant to be about teleology.
Oh no. What have I done? No.
Every time Lyra does something, like, inexplicably, like, destiny led, or, when she's just like, oh, I just, like, had to wake up and go look out at the aurora, and then I just happened to see all of these witches flying overhead or whatever. It's just like, oh, fucking teleology.
Teleology.
She's
That's right.
fulfilling her fucking ultimate purpose. And actually, I did have one other comment while we're kind of still talking about the battle between the bears and, like, exchanging the rulers. Because last episode we talked a little bit about whether or not we thought the TV show would try and, like, bring in comparisons to the current modern political situation. And I feel like this is one of the places where they could actually try and do that, in terms of, like, having an inept, narcissistic ruler who, came through.
He's going to make Svalbard great again.
Yeah, something like that. I don't know.
So I'm all for this. But keep in mind that this is written and produced by English people who also do have political problems right now, and maybe they want to say something about their own politics.
I mean, the Brexit metaphor for Svalbard isn't quite as obvious to me, but I'm sure they'll think of something.
I'm not saying that. That Svalbard wants to leave. No, I'm just saying not everybody writing pop culture right now thinks in terms of American politics.
No, but like most of the world is at least somewhat aware of American politics most of the time. And especially now, given that our president is who he fucking is, like, I don't know.
Yeah. They're having a constitutional crisis over there too right now. And their right wing is being pretty crazy as well. So I don't even think you'd have to stretch very far to be like, it's weird because, he wants to like integrate their society and that's like considered bad. It is kind of weird if you think about it like that. I think maybe that's part of what bothers me too, because like for me, I want like a larger goal of like, there's a lot of injustice that we need to like deal with in our collective world history, and especially like in Western history. But ultimately, I would like there to be like some kind of synthesis, not like a subsuming of other people's cultures and stuff, or like a uniform culture. I don't want that, but like it would be nice to like aim towards can we all be a people, and like that's kind of what the Bears are reaching for there, to like we're going to join human society and be people together with them, and it's like no, that's bad, don't do that. And like that's a little bit of a weird message to me.
I don't know. I don't think I necessarily agree. I like the idea more of not. Well, I don't know. It's hard to say. I like the idea of cultures staying separate so that they can stay themselves. But I do also like the idea of obviously having good relations and not thinking of human beings as other.
Yeah, so that's what I want to get away from.
Yeah, so it's kind of, it's difficult to think of what the best place would be there. I mean, obviously the best place would just be don't be assholes, but as we've seen, that's never going to happen.
Maybe. Hopefully we get over it. I don't know. Somebody has to come up with a new structure.
But I'm sure there's a lot of countries out there that look back on the past, 90 years or whatever and kind of wish that America had just stayed isolationist. Just minded their own goddamn business.
Including some of us.
And other countries too, I'm sure. But I don't know. It's hard to say.
I think that your metaphor about Mrs. Coulter being Satan was definitely something that I noticed that her tactics are colonialism tactics. Like 100%. Like we're going to find the minority power in the group, and then we're going to fund them, and we're going to groom them, and then we're going to come in and replace them. And we're just going to set up our own institutions in the same spot and make their people into our workers. They're like, it's 100% colonialism. I don't think it's an accident at all what Pullman does there. They're like, Mrs. Coulter is so evil. Like she is definitely the Satan.
And again, like they say that she has an army of Tartars that she was going to bring in and take over. And again, these are the people that the magisterium was almost at war with at the beginning.
Yeah.
So that is very confusing to me. Do we have anything else that we wanted to talk about?
Seraphina and Fardercorum?
Yeah, well, I wanted to talk about that, but I was...
Oh.
Did you guys want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, and I kind of want to talk about... this is the chapter where we find out about the whole, like, witches... Like, why witches are all women, and yes. Like, the way they interact with humans.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I love this.
Yes, so I wanted to bring up Seraphina and Fardercorum's relationship, because through that we do learn a lot about the witches, and that they have relationships with men if they want and have children with them, but they can't ever spend their life with a man because men age and much slower than the witches because they live for hundreds and hundreds of years. And then if they have male children, they're human. But if they have female children, they're witches.
Right. And so like, it's not something you can learn, right? It seems to be like intrinsic.
Yes.
Which is really interesting. Like, it's not just cultural. It seems to be like, who knows? Like, it's really weird. And so are there demons fundamentally different on some level because of that? Like, can the male, can the guys' demons separate from them? Or are they just normal? Like, they just seem to be human?
I can give you an answer to that.
I just don't remember this stuff. And I was oh, this is cool.
They can't. You find out why that happens. You find out about how that all happens.
You mean
they're just...
You find out why the witch demons can separate?
Yes, you do.
Okay.
So yeah, the men are just normal human beings. Like the consul that we met, he's a child of a witch, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So he's still involved in the culture, but has to exist outside of it because he's a man.
I see.
And then, and through that, we also find out that Seraphina is the queen of her clan, and that there are different clans, and presumably each one has a different queen. And then we learn a lot about how she felt about Fardarkorn when they were young, or when he was young. She still looks young. And how how they were very much in love, and how she wished she could change her very nature so that she could have stayed with him and been with him. And she also mentions how she doesn't want to see him now because she thinks it would just bring shame to him and sadness to her, and it's better if they just never see each other again.
It's so sad.
And how, just in general, they are unable to be together due to their natures. And again, for people who've read the whole series, this sounds very parallel to some other characters, and how I mentioned before the similarity that Fardarkorn's demon is to another demon. It just seems very parallel to me. That's all.
So I agree on one level. It's like a very sad and touching and romantic story. But part of me in the back of my brain is like, oh, it's like a really awesome, extraordinary woman who wants to give up like all of her power to be with a fairly ordinary dude. That's awesome.
Okay, so I thought that too. But
this feminist killjoy moment has been brought to you by...
No, I thought that too. But ultimately, that's it. It's a feeling that she has. Like, she knows he can't be a witch. Like, he can't join her in there. He can't grab a cloud pine and fly around with her. So that's probably just what she was thinking in the moment. And ultimately, when she needs to, she goes back to be queen. Like, no matter how sad it makes her, she doesn't stay with him.
Yeah.
So
she doesn't pull an Arwen. Yeah.
And
sorry, it's true.
And also, like, when she says that she's staying away from him, she's not staying away from him to protect her own feelings. She's staying away from him to protect his ego. Like, come on.
You don't think it's a little bit of both?
I mean, sure. I just think a woman would have written it differently.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, 100%. But I do think that Seraphina doesn't want to see him as much as she thinks he doesn't want to see her. She just doesn't say that.
There's a lot of sadness in her.
And also,
I'm listening to the audiobook, and the actress who does that does a really good job of transmitting that sadness when she talks about it too.
Yeah, she's really good. I will say, what you said about the killjoy thing, about her wanting to give up everything for a man, I mean, there is a lot of bad feelings about women in the feminist movement, about them wanting to be homemakers, or, not wanting to have jobs and to just be a wife. And I think that is a legitimate choice that some people truly want. And it's shitty that it is thought less of because women have to be, powerful and independent and all. You know what I mean? Like,
no, that's fair. Like, choice feminism is absolutely the right feminism, and people should be able to do what they want.
Yeah, like, I don't think that it would have been right for Seraphina to choose that. I don't think she would have been happy ultimately, but at the time, she was in love enough that she thought it was what she wanted. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I do agree that it was very obviously written by a man, but...
And what you just said there about, like, feminism and people getting mad about it is exactly the thing that I just went on that very long rant about.
Right, yes.
Performing your group and all of that. give up what you want to fit into the group so you can be there and have choices.
Which, I mean, it's kind of what Seraphina did. She gave up being with Fardercorm to go back and be with her clan. But again, I do think, just from what we know about her, I don't think she would have been happy ultimately with Fardercorm, having given everything up, because she talks about how witches feel about flying and how they feeling the moon and the stars on them and all that sort of thing. And in a way, she would have been giving all that up too.
Right.
So there's other things at play, but yeah.
And there's also the child they lost. And that
Yeah,
can be
that was-
very
Oh,
hard to
yeah.
get
No,
over.
that's totally fair. Losing a child is really hard and like causes a lot of marriages to fail.
Yeah.
And she talks about how when the witches have male children, because they have the lifespans of normal humans, even if they live to an old age, they seem to just sort of flicker in front of their eyes. So losing one when he was still a child, it was so fast for her. And
Right.
I'm not saying that she was less attached. I'm saying that it was so brief that she had this child that she loved a lot in her life. And that's just really sad.
It's a good like micro story that gets put in here. It's really good.
Yeah. Anybody else have anything they wanted to talk about from these chapters?
No, I just thought it was interesting that up until this point, we've always been led to believe that Lord Asriel and Mrs. Coulter have different endgames and are being motivated by different things. And then in this chapter, the book kind of switches a little bit and makes it seem like they actually have the same goal. They just want to be the one to do it first.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah.
So I thought that was really interesting. And again, given that I only have a vague recollection of the ending, kind of surprised me.
So wait, why do you think they want the same thing?
Well, the text actually says that. I mean, it's possible that the text is being misleading, but
Yeah, I think it does say something.
But who
like
says that?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember if it's not the narrator.
It must be Seraphina, I'm assuming.
It might be. I can't remember.
Oh, then I would bring up that when Seraphina is talking about what Lyra's doing in the north and that she has to bring something to Lord Asriel, she is very unsure when she's saying that too. Like in everything else that she says to Lee, she's very confident and very sure. But when she's talking about Lyra bringing something to Lord Asriel, she's less sure. And even when Lyra asks the alethiometer, and the alethiometer says she has to bring something to Lord Asriel, and she assumes it is the alethiometer, she then thinks, but that isn't quite right, because she knows how the alethiometer refers to itself, and this was something different.
Yeah, so
Right.
I did remember. Yeah, I did notice that.
I'm not sure where it says it. It might be an assumption that Lyra is making. Yeah, I can't remember. I do remember what you're talking about, though. I definitely remember that.
I remember reading it too.
Pullman wants us to feel that way about her coming there, that she's trying to scoop Asriel on a certain level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just don't personally think she is.
Right. Yeah. Whether that's reality or not, I think that's what we are set up to believe.
It is at the very least, I think it's like foreshadowing that maybe Lord Asriel isn't as on the up and up as we've thought so far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. He's done a ton of work to like rehabilitate Asriel in Lyra's eyes, or like our eyes, right? With like, he's associated everybody who's good in the book with Asriel at this point.
And
Right.
set him up so much as in opposition to Mrs. Coulter, who's literally Satan, or figuratively
The
Satan.
worst person. Yeah. Yeah.
Bear Satan.
Bears.
I can't find it. Maybe we should just sign off.
No, well, I think this was an interesting conversation, because what does Mrs. Coulter want, really? What does Lord Asriel want? Like, do we even know?
Yeah, I don't think so.
we
I don't think
know
you could.
yet.
Genuinely, I've read these books a million times, and I'm like, what does Mrs. Coulter want? Like, you know, I don't even think Mrs. Coulter knows. You know,
For
like,
real.
She
I think that's true.
wants power. She wants respect. And control. But what does she want? What is her end game? I don't know. I don't think she knows.
Yeah, I think, ooh, this feels like a anti-feminist reading, but I feel like Miss Coulter wants power because she's trying to, like, prove that she can move around in the world of men and, like, be as worthy as, like, all of these men who she's competing with.
I don't disagree with that to a point. Like, I think that's part of why she wants power, is really to show up all these men, especially coming from where her story began. But throughout the books, like, her motivations, they either change or they become more clear to the reader. I honestly don't know which. And it's clear that right now, Mrs. Coulter is going through some shit. Like, we don't see it here, but I wish we kind of got bits of this from her point of view, because it would be very interesting to see what she is thinking when she's coming after Lyra. Like, why does she want Lyra?
That is something I hope for in the show, that we spend more time with characters who aren't Lyra and get to, like, explore them, and to have a even more three-dimensional Mrs. Coulter would be pretty cool. So maybe they can do that, in the show. Why wouldn't you do that, really?
I actually think Mrs. Coulter is a little bit more scary and evil, not knowing her motivations and not knowing what she wants.
Oh, sure.
Like, all this conversation is just stuff that I want for me. I think the story works better not knowing these things about her.
You can have, like, it would be kind of interesting to have the female characters never get to do this. We talk about this on our American Gods show. There's a character named Laura on that show where you get the kind of Walter White or, like, Tony Soprano type character where they're like, you sympathize with them, but you recognize that, like, everything they're doing is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And just women just don't get to be that character so often. So I'm kind of into, like, a sad Darth Vader woman character. I don't know.
Like, into it?
Well, no. Like, story-wise. Like, I think that would be cool. So, like,
sorry, no, I'm just giving you a hard time. If you were, it wouldn't be a problem.
It's not my kink. No.
I agree that we should have more women like that, especially like those two characters who, what's the word, that, like,
anti-heroes and stuff.
Yeah, but what am I trying to say? That they're the main character, that they hold the story. You know?
That's true. That's a good point.
I don't think Mrs. Coulter is that, because she is just straight up an evil bitch.
Mm-hmm. She's the antagonist.
Yeah. And she just has, well, as of right now, in this book, she is just straight up an evil bitch. And I just know where she is going, and I know that there's, like, thoughts happening in her head, and, like, anytime she's grabbing for Lyra, I'm like, but why? Why are you going through all of this just to get Lyra?
Teleology, right? That's
No!
Do you have a guess as to why she's after Lyra? Don't say teleology.
No, I don't actually think that's why. I mean, there's a hint from earlier that maybe she, like, regrets losing Lyra, for her entire life. This story is kind of, like, reflected in the Serafina Fodder Quorum story where they lost their child and Lyra lost her parents, and, like, does she want Lyra to be her own? I mean, that is really the reason that I keep saying the Darth Vader thing, to, like, join me and we'll control the universe together. Does she want to make Lyra her little Mrs. Coulter, her mini me,
I think on some level she definitely does. And you kind of see that when she first gets custody of Lyra earlier in the book.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, so who knows? But does she know about the prophecy? It's weird who knows about this witch prophecy and who doesn't, because, like, why does the Jordan College guy know that? Like, these witches stand outside the magisterial system, so, like, that's interesting.
Maybe he also slept with a witch when he was young.
So join us next time. We'll be talking about chapters 21 to 23, which is the end of the book. Yay! And if you like our show, please take some time to leave us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. I'm Anya, and you can follow me on Twitter at Strangely Literal. That's strangely, then Literl.
I'm Caitlin, and you can follow me on Twitter at Inferior Caitlin.
Follow the show on Twitter at MOTPod. Need more than 280 characters to speak your mind? Send your email to contact@hollowedgroundmedia.com.
And don't forget to eat the heart of your enemies after defeating them in single combat.